Hi, Chris here, and today I'm going to show you how I made this pick tip for Abloy Sentry. I'm only going to cover the disc manipulator. The tensioner here is one that was supplied with the pick. You could absolutely make one of these yourself. Just get a shape that looks a bit like that, really, out of stainless tube. If you want to see how I make tensioners along these lines, then I've got another video where I make one for anchor lass. I use very similar techniques. But no, just going to look at this tip. This is a very fine bit of work, this one. It takes a lot of care and a bit of time. So yeah, it's not easy, but once you've put the effort in and you've got a tip like this, it is really very effective, actually, and I've used this to open a couple of different sentries now. I'm going to make it from a 1mm shaft ejector pin, a bit like this one. These are pretty thin and bendy, but it's really about as big as will fit down the middle of the warding and the lock, so I'm kind of stuck with it, really. So before we get into the make, I think it's worth explaining exactly what I'm trying to achieve. So here we've got a view down the lock with the front plate removed, and you can see the top code disc, which happens to be a max rotation disc, in its neutral position with the DC bars. So what I'm going to do is make a key sized rectangular profile, and then I'm going to cut notches in the end of it, or file some notches in the end of it to fit on the triangular sections on the inside of the disc, and that's what will grab onto the disc and turn the disc each way. And then I'm going to remove material from the side so it doesn't clash with the DC bars. That needs to be enough material to get on a disc in this sort of position, and then also turn it for 4 of the available 6 positions reversibly, and a profile like this can do that. And then for the final 2 positions, this tip would drop between the discs, turn back, and then use the edge of the pick rather than the notch to push the disc into a gate in one of the last 2 positions. Now that is not reversible with the pick tip, but if you've eliminated the rest of the arc of the disc, then that is where your true gate is. So here I am in my workshop with everything I'm going to need for this build. So I have my pen. For material removal, I'm going to be using a mixture of bench grinder and Dremel, and I've got 2 different discs for the Dremel. I've got the thin cutting disc and also a grinding disc. I will be doing some hand filing, so I've got a file and a little bit of sandpaper just for smoothing things off. Some things a set of calipers will be useful for, so I've got my calipers, and I have a core that I've taken out of another lock just there in the vise, which I'll be using as a template. I'll show you how. One of the discs from it and a key, and those will be useful for just making sure I've got everything the right size. And I will also, I'm going to time this. It doesn't take all that long, it does require some care. I'm not going to be rushing it, but it's just interesting to see how long it takes. Okay, so first job is to thin this end down to 1 to 1.5 millimeters thick, something like that. So I'm just going to be doing it, putting it on the grinder, turning it to make sure it stays nice and flat, and using the water to keep it cool. Okay, so after coming up for 10 minutes, got that. So that is now down at 1.4 millimeters thickness, and that is perfect. So the next step is to get the profile to match the internal profile of the disc. So I'm going to file some notches into there. Now before I start that, because that's quite tricky, I'm actually just going to put a pen line across the middle. I'm going to use that as a guide, because you can never see both sides of this at once, so it's good to have that guide. And basically that is going to be the equivalent of where the DC bars would sit, like that. I'll just about be able to see that. So I'm going to try and file parallel to that down, a little notch there, a little notch there. While you're doing this, it's important, if you're using a disc as a template, make sure you've got it the right way up. It's easiest to do the filing if you file from this end, but of course then you have to flip the disc over to make sure that you are filing on the right side. So after a few minutes of extremely careful hand filing, I now have that, and I'm pretty happy with that. It's not quite perfect, but it is good enough, I think. So next phase is to start cutting down the tip so it will fit into the keyway. Okay, so I've ground that down into this sort of flattened Z shape, which, you know, near enough the same size as the end of the key. That's 3mm thick if you want to measure it. So now I'm going to need to start shaping the final tip. So I'm going to go in and remove material like that. So I can get a decent range of motion on the tip. Yeah, so this is getting pretty close now. So I'm in that phase where I'm going to keep checking it in the lock, and it won't quite go in just yet. I've got to take a little bit of material off to get it past the warding. Just take a little bit off around the shaft to fit through there. But now I'm going to switch to the thinner disc for fine work. You've got to be super careful with this, because it can remove material really quite fast. So I'm going to be a low speed, very light pressure, and I'm going to keep cut and check, cut and check. Okay, that will now go down into the lock, just about. But what it won't do is pick up on a 0 disc. So I need to just take a little bit more off the arms on the side, such that I can turn it in the DC, get it onto that disc, while the front plate is in the position to do the tensioning. Okay, so after some very, very careful shaping, I've paused the stopwatch to show you this, because this is important. So we've now got a tip which will fit in down through the warding. Now, of course, when the lock is tensioned, that front plate will be there, and we need to be able to get on a neutral disc from that position, and this will just sneak on. It's just got enough range of motion to get onto that disc, and turn it to that, and of course it will be able to turn it in both directions up to that point, and then if necessary we can drop off and go that last little bit. So shape wise, that is now pretty much there. It is, of course, very, very thin now to get that range of motion. So actually what I'm going to do is leave thickness on the middle bit of that, and I'm just going to take thickness off just the tips of the sort of Y's there, which need to pass between the discs. But that bit in the middle can stay quite thick. If I just whip everything out of here. So you see down in the bottom of the lock, there's a bit of a recess that the tip of the key will fit into, and that is now about the same depth as that, so it can sneak down into the back of the lock, and that thickness is not going to be a problem. And comparing it to the key, you can see that cut there is for the metal the steel anti-wear disc down at the bottom of the stack, and this will just sneak in behind that. So if you've not got calipers, you can use the key as a measuring aid. So now, next step, I'm just going to take some thickness off the ends. Now, the most obvious way to take the thickness off here would be to use the hand file, but this is a very thin part now, and I want to keep the force on it as low as I can, really. So I'm going to use a Dremel instead, but because it's so thin, it will get hot very quickly. Material will be removed very, very fast, so I'm going to be super careful, take it very slow, and hopefully get just the ends of this down to 0.4 millimeters thick. There we go, so that is pretty good now. I am just going to do a tiny bit of hand filing just to get into the corners and really sort of square them up. But otherwise, I think that is ready for testing. You can see I've left that extra thickness on in the midsection where the arms, you can see the highest bending, and we've got thin bits that can pass through the discs and navigate the lock. So I'll give this a little bit of polish on sandpaper, and that should be ready to go. Time wise, just past the hour, so we'll stop it there. Okay, for testing this tool out, I managed to get hold of some nice goodies from Lock Skipper in America. Got this clear acrylic core where you can, it's kind of difficult to film, but when you're using it, it's fine. You can see the discs moving, in this case with the key, but of course when I was doing the tool testing, I was checking that they were doing the right thing with the tool. And then these two padlocks with Sentry cores, both of which came keyless, unfortunately, so I had to pick both of these blind, but I did manage that. Quite pleased with that. This one is probably the harder of the two, in that this one it's got I think about half the discs are mastered, but it does have somewhat unusual bitting at the back of the lock. Almost all Sentries have got 3 full rotation discs and then 1 unrotated disc at the back, so you can get a good head start by just repositioning everything, and that's true of this lock, but this one actually doesn't. It's got a slightly different setup. So although getting the disc set was easier, it did take me still a couple of goes because of that differences at the back, and I had to use feel rather than just position everything, because you know where it goes. Anyway, let's put this one in a vise and I will show you the tool working. Okay, so here you have the lock in the vise. This is a key from a different lock, so obviously it doesn't work. It just shows that all of the discs are zeroed. And now I've picked this a few times now, and I have a map of the gates in front of me, so this is quite unrepresentative of what it was like to pick it, but what it does do is show you how the tool works and show the techniques. So I've put the pick tip all the way to the back of the lock. Just get the tensioner in. There we go. So that pick tip now is sitting behind the anti-wear disc at the back, in that little gap. So I'm just going to counter rotate that slightly, get on the anti-wear disc, start to turn that all the way. There we go. So that's the anti-wear disc turned all the way. And the rear profile plate too. So we're going to turn the last code disc all the way full 90 degrees. It's not quite there yet. There we go. So that's now full 90. And then, like most Sentries, this one has a 0 on that next disc. Yep, I can feel that. That's great. Next one up, it's actually a 1 cut. I can feel much less motion there than there where it's in a gate, so I can tell that's not in a gate. There, that's now nice and loose, that's in that gate. Okay, next one up is disc 6. Again, I can feel that's binding. There, now that's in a gate. I can't really feel that it's a false gate now, but I know that it is from picking it before. So I'm going to tuck round into the spacer gap round the back. Just nudge that on until it drops into the next gate. There we go. Okay, disc 5. Feeling very loose, I don't think I've got that one quite right. Move that on a little bit more. Yeah, that's more like it. Okay, that's in a gate, but that's a false gate. I'll nudge that on. Okay. Now we're on disc 4. That is 0, or rather a 5 cut. That's in a gate already. Going to leave that alone. Disc 3. So that's into a false gate. And there, now that's in a true. Disc 2. nicely. It's into a full skate. So tuck round. That's in a gate, I might need to come back to it. Finally, disc 1. Okay, disc 1's quite loose, so probably haven't set. Next one up quite right. And there we go. Okay. Ooh. You can see the tool doing its job, and that is a lot easier. I'm not doing it blind. I won't bother with a full gut. I'll just take the core out so you can see that all of those discs have been turned. Some of them as far as they could go, so that pick tip is doing its job. There we go. I'll fetch that later. So that's the core. You can see the sidebar sitting in the trough of the made by all the true gates, and there is the disc positions. So we've got max rotation there on disc 1, and then we've got 3 max rotations at the back, so the anti-wear, the profile plate, and the last code disc. And we've got a couple of close to max rotations as well on disc 2 and disc 6. So there we are. It's still a difficult lock, but tool like that makes it, I think, about as easy as it reasonably could be.